The golden sun of Vela Prime rose over the capital city, painting the tall crystal towers in shades of orange and pink. It was the first day of the Alliance Summit, and representatives from 20 different species had gathered in the Grand Palace of High Commander Nara. Ships from distant worlds filled the sky, and the streets below buzzed with excitement. Yuri walked through the main hall of her mother's palace with her head held high. She was young by Velan standards, barely past her 100th cycle, but she carried herself like royalty. And why not? She was the daughter of the most powerful military leader in the known galaxy. Her silver skin caught the light as she moved, and her 4 eyes scanned every corner of the room with practiced pride. 2 attendants followed close behind her. They were lower-born Velans, assigned to serve the commander's daughter and keep her company. Yuri liked having them around. They always agreed with everything she said. The hall was filled with delegates from across the stars. Yuri paused near a tall window and watched them pass. First came the Kelthari, their massive bodies covered in natural armor that could stop plasma fire. Each one stood nearly 3 meters tall, and the ground shook slightly with every step they took. Yuri nodded with respect. The Kelthari were true warriors. Next came the Mirith, floating gracefully above the floor on invisible waves of mental energy. Their pale, slender forms seemed almost ghostly. They did not need to speak aloud because their thoughts could touch any mind they wished. Yuri found them unsettling but impressive. Then there were the Auran, small and fragile-looking but known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology. A single Auran warship could disable an entire fleet with weapons that bent space itself. Yuri gave them a small bow as they passed, but then she saw another group approaching from the far end of the hall, and her expression changed. Humans. There were only 5 of them. They wore simple gray uniforms with a small blue symbol on their shoulders. They walked in a straight line, following a woman who appeared to be their ambassador. And standing at the back of the group, silent and watchful, was a soldier. Yuri studied him with all 4 of her eyes. He was not impressive. Not at all. He stood about average height for a human, which meant he was shorter than almost every other species in the room. His hair was dark with streaks of silver, and his skin showed the lines of age. She noticed scars on his hands and neck, pale marks that spoke of old wounds. He looked tired. He looked weak. Yuri let out a soft laugh and turned to her attendants. "Look at them," she said quietly. "The mighty human delegation." Her attendant smiled and nodded. "Tell me," Yuri continued, "why does the Alliance even allow them a seat at the table? They have no armor, no telepathy, no strength. A single Kelthari child could crush a grown human with one hand." One of her attendants, a young male named Soren, leaned closer. "I have heard stories about them, my lady. They require sleep every single night, sometimes for 8 hours or more. Their bodies simply stop working if they do not rest." Yuri's eyes widened with amusement. 8 hours? Every night? "Yes, my lady. And they must eat multiple times each day, or they become weak and confused. Their bodies are very demanding." The other attendant, a female named Vera, added her own knowledge. "I have also heard that their bones break easily. A fall from a small height can shatter their limbs, and their skin tears open with the smallest cut. They bleed constantly." Yuri shook her head slowly. How did such a species even survive long enough to reach the stars? It seems like a miracle they did not go extinct on their own world. Her attendants laughed politely at her joke. Yuri looked back at the human soldier. He had stopped walking and now stood guard beside the human ambassador, who was speaking with a group of Mirith delegates. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his eyes moved slowly across the room, watching everything. For a moment, his gaze met Yuri's. She expected him to look away quickly, as most lesser beings did when they caught her staring. But he did not. He simply looked at her for a brief second, then returned his attention to his duties. There was no fear in his eyes, no nervousness, just calm observation. Yuri felt a small flash of annoyance. Did he not know who she was? What is that soldier's name? She asked. Soren checked a small device on his wrist. His name is Kang Taeho, my lady. He's listed as a sergeant in the human military. He serves as a guard for their diplomatic missions. A sergeant, Yuri repeated. Not even a high rank. Just a common soldier. She watched Taeho for another long moment. He stood perfectly still, like a statue. His face showed no emotion. He did not fidget or shift his weight. He simply waited and watched. Yuri admitted to herself that he had some discipline. But discipline was not strength. Discipline could not stop a plasma bolt or win a war. The humans were guests in her mother's palace, allowed to participate in galactic politics only because the Alliance believed in including all spacefaring species. It was charity, nothing more. I think, Yuri said slowly, that someone should remind the humans of their place in this galaxy. Vera tilted her head. What do you mean, my lady? Yuri smiled. It was not a kind smile. They walk through these halls as if they are equals. They stand among giants and pretend they belong. Perhaps they need a lesson in reality. She began walking toward the human delegation, her attendants hurrying to keep up. My lady, Soren said nervously, your mother has given strict orders that all delegates must be treated with respect during the summit. I will be perfectly respectful, Yuri said smoothly. I simply wish to welcome our human guests personally. Surely there is nothing wrong with that. She reached the human group just as the ambassador finished her conversation with the Mirith. Yuri put on her most charming smile and spread her arms in a gesture of welcome. Ambassador, she said warmly. I am Yuri, daughter of High Commander Nara. On behalf of the Velen people, I welcome you to our world. The human ambassador, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, returned the smile. Thank you, Yuri. We are honored to be here. Your mother's invitation was most generous. Yuri nodded graciously, but her eyes drifted past the ambassador to the soldiers standing behind her. Kang Taeho had not moved. He had not reacted to her presence at all. And who is this? Yuri asked, gesturing toward him. Your guard? Yes, this is Sergeant Kang Taeho. He has served with distinction for many years. Yuri looked at Taeho directly. Distinction, she repeated. How interesting. Tell me, Sergeant, what battles have you fought? What victories have you won? Taeho met her gaze calmly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. I have served where I was needed, my lady. That is all. Yuri waited for more, but he said nothing else. His answer was so simple, so boring, that she almost laughed. I see, she said. A soldier, a few words. She turned back to the ambassador, still smiling. Please enjoy your time on Valor Prime. I hope the summit meets all your expectations. Then she walked away, her attendants following close behind. When they were far enough away, Yuri spoke quietly. Did you see that? He could not even answer a simple question properly. No pride, no fire, just empty obedience. Humans are not known for their spirit. Vera agreed. Yer. I thought about the way Taeho had looked at her. Calm, patient, unafraid. It bothered her more than she wanted to admit. She decided then that she would not let it go. Tomorrow at the opening banquet, she would show the entire galaxy exactly what humans were worth. Nothing at all. The banquet hall was the largest room in the palace. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top, and the walls were made of living crystal that changed color with the mood of the room. Tonight, the crystals glowed a warm gold, welcoming the hundreds of delegates who filled the space. Long tables stretched across the floor, covered with food from 100 different worlds. There were dishes that glowed, dishes that moved, and dishes that sang softly when touched. Servants moved between the tables, refilling glasses and answering questions about the strange foods. Yuri sat near the head table, close to where her mother would eventually take her place. High Commander Nara had not yet arrived. She was meeting with senior military officials before the banquet, discussing matters that Yuri was not allowed to know about. This suited Yuri fine. It gave her time to prepare. She had dressed carefully for tonight. Her gown was made of fabric that shifted like liquid metal, and her jewelry was carved from the bones of ancient beasts that had once ruled. Velar Prime. She looked every bit the princess she believed herself to be. Her eyes found the human delegation across the room. They sat at a smaller table near the wall, surrounded by species who clearly did not think much of them. The ambassador was making polite conversation with an Oran scientist, but the other humans looked uncomfortable. They picked at their food and spoke quietly among themselves, and there was Kang Taiho, standing behind the ambassador's chair instead of sitting. He was not eating. He was not talking. He was simply standing guard, as if danger could appear at any moment in the middle of a peaceful banquet. Yeri found it almost sad. Did he not understand that he was safe here? Did he not realize that no one would bother attacking humans? They were not worth the effort. She stood from her seat and smoothed her gown. Her attendants moved to follow her, but she waved them back. "Stay here," she said. "I will handle this alone." She walked slowly across the hall, making sure that others noticed her approach. Several delegates stopped their conversations to watch. Yeri enjoyed the attention. By the time she reached the human table, at least 50 pairs of eyes were following her. "Ambassador," Yeri said sweetly, "I hope you are enjoying the food. Our chefs have worked very hard to accommodate all species." The ambassador smiled politely. "Everything is wonderful. Thank you. Your hospitality has been excellent." Yeri nodded and then turned her attention to Taiho. He had not moved from his position behind the ambassador's chair. His eyes met hers briefly before returning to scan the room. "Sergeant Taiho," Yeri said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You have been standing all evening. Surely you must be tired. Humans require so much rest after all." A few quiet laughs came from the surrounding tables. Taiho did not react. "Your concern is kind," he said simply, "but I am fine." Yeri took a step closer. "I have been thinking about our conversation yesterday. You said you have served where you were needed. But I wonder, what does that actually mean for a human soldier?" The room grew quieter. More delegates were listening now. "Humans have no natural weapons," Yuri continued. "No armor, no special abilities. When you go to war, what exactly do you do? Stand in the back and hope the real warriors protect you?" The ambassador's smile faded. "Yuri, I do not think this is appropriate." "I mean no offense," Yuri said quickly. "I am simply curious. We Velans have a saying, a warrior's worth is measured by the weight of their blade. I am wondering what blade humans carry." Taiho finally looked at her directly. His expression was still calm, but something in his eyes had changed. It was subtle, like a door closing quietly. "We carry what we must," he said. Yeri laughed. "How mysterious. But words are easy, Sergeant. Anyone can speak bravely." She raised her voice so the entire hall could hear. "Among my people, we have a tradition. When warriors meet, they test each other's strength with a simple contest. They grip hands and squeeze until one yields. It is a sign of respect and a measure of character." She extended her hand toward Taiho. "Would you honor me with this tradition, Sergeant? A friendly test between species?" The hall fell completely silent. Every delegate, every servant, every guard was watching now. The crystals on the walls had shifted to a pale blue, sensing the tension in the room. The ambassador stood quickly. "Yeri, this is not necessary. Sergeant Taiho is here as a guard, not a performer. It is only a friendly contest," Yeri said innocently. "Unless the sergeant is afraid?" Taiho looked at the ambassador, then back at Yeri. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stepped forward and took her hand. His grip was warm and dry. His fingers wrapped around hers firmly but not aggressively. He was waiting for her to begin. Yeri smiled. This would be easy. Valen's strength was legendary. Their muscles were 3 times denser than human tissue. She could crush rocks with her bare hands. This fragile human would yield in seconds. And everyone would see exactly how weak his species truly was. She began to squeeze. Her fingers tightened around his hand, applying pressure that would have made any Velen wince. She watched his face, waiting for the pain to appear. But Taiho's expression did not change. She squeezed harder. Now she was using real strength, the kind that could bend metal. His hand should have crumpled like paper. His bones should have creaked under the pressure. Nothing happened. His hand trembled slightly. She could see a vein pulsing on his neck. Sweat appeared on his forehead. He was clearly in pain. But he did not yield. He did not pull away. He simply stood there, holding her grip, and endured. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Then 30. Whispers spread through the hall. The crystals on the walls flickered between colors. Confused by the strange emotions filling the room, Yeri's arm began to ache. She was squeezing as hard as she could now, using strength that would have defeated any warrior in her mother's army. And still the human held on. His face was pale. His breath came in short, controlled gasps. Pain was written in every line of his body. But his eyes never left hers, and his grip never weakened. A full minute passed. Yeri felt something she had never felt before. It was not fear, exactly. It was confusion, disbelief. She was one of the strongest young Velanes alive. And this fragile human was matching her through sheer will. Finally, she released his hand and stepped back. The hall erupted in murmurs. Yeri forced herself to laugh, though it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Very impressive, Sergeant," she said. "You are more stubborn than I expected." But stubbornness is not the same as strength. Taiho flexed his fingers slowly. She could see red marks where her grip had pressed into his flesh. His hand would bruise badly by tomorrow. But when he spoke, his voice was as calm as ever. "Thank you for the honor of your tradition, my lady." Then he bowed politely and returned to his position behind the ambassador's chair. He did not look at her again. Yeri stood frozen for a moment. She had expected victory. She had expected the human to crumble and beg for mercy. Instead, she had been forced to release first. Not because she was weak, but because she could not understand what was happening. How had he done that? How had he endured pain that would have broken anyone else? She walked back to her table, her attendants watching her with worried eyes. She sat down heavily and stared at her plate without seeing it. Around the hall, delegates were whispering. Some were looking at the human table with new expressions. Not respect, exactly, but curiosity, interest. One of her attendants leaned close. "My lady, that was still impressive. You clearly caused him great pain. He will surely feel it for days." Yeri said nothing. She kept thinking about his eyes. There had been pain there, yes. But there had been something else too. Something harder to name. It was like looking at a wall that had weathered 1,000 storms and refused to fall. A servant approached her table and bowed low. "My lady, High Commander Nara, requests your presence in her private chamber. Immediately." Yeri's blood ran cold. Her mother had not been at the banquet. She'd have been watching from somewhere else. She stood slowly, suddenly feeling very young. "Tell her I am coming." As she walked toward the door, she glanced back at the human table one last time. Kang Taiho was still standing in the same spot, watching the room with those quiet, patient eyes. And for the first time, Yuri wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The walk to her mother's private chamber felt longer than usual. Yuri passed through corridors she had known since childhood, but tonight they seemed cold and unfamiliar. The guards at each door watched her pass with expressions she could not read. High Commander, Nara's war chamber was deep inside the palace, behind doors of solid metal that could withstand orbital bombardment. It was her mother's most private space, where she planned battles and studied enemies. Yuri had been inside only a handful of times in her entire life. The doors opened silently as she approached. She stepped inside and stopped. The room was dark, except for a massive holographic display floating in the center. It showed an image she did not recognize at first. A space station, old and damaged, surrounded by darkness. Strange ships filled the background, their shapes twisted and wrong. It was a frozen moment from some ancient battle. Her mother stood before the display, her back to Yuri. High Commander Nara was tall even by Velan standards, and she wore her military uniform like a second skin. Her silver hair was pulled back tightly, and her four eyes reflected the blue light of the hologram. "Close the door," Nara said without turning around. Yuri obeyed. The heavy doors sealed behind her with a soft click. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Yuri waited for her mother to yell, to lecture, to punish. But Nara simply stood there, staring at the frozen battlefield. Finally, she spoke. "Do you know what you are looking at?" Yuri studied the image. The space station was old Velan design. The strange ships around it were unfamiliar, but something about their organic shapes made her skin crawl. "I do not recognize it," she admitted. "This is Chiron Station," Nara said. 12 years ago, it was our most important outer colony. 20,000 civilians lived there. Scientists, families, children. They were studying a new region of space, looking for resources we desperately needed. She touched a control, and the hologram began to move. The twisted ships started swarming around the station like insects around a light. Then the Drekker came. Yuri felt a chill run through her body. She knew about the Drekker. Every child in the galaxy knew about them. They were not a species that could be reasoned with or understood. They were a swarm, a hunger that consumed everything in its path. Entire civilizations had been devoured by them before the Alliance finally drove them back. The Drekker surrounded Chiron Station and destroyed our fleet in less than 2 hours, Nara continued. They cut off all escape routes. 20,000 of our people were trapped, waiting to die. The hologram showed the Velan warships breaking apart under the Drekker assault. Escape pods were swallowed by the swarm before they could get far. It was a massacre. I was commanding the nearest reinforcement fleet, Nara said. We were 3 weeks away at maximum speed. 3 weeks. And we knew the Drekker would break through the station's defenses in less than 3 days. She turned to face Yuri. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was heavy with old pain. Those people were going to die. My own brother was among them, and there was nothing I could do to save them. Yuri did not know what to say. She had never heard this story before. Her mother never spoke about the past. Then something unexpected happened, Nara said. She touched the controls again, and the hologram shifted to show a different view. A single ship was approaching the battle zone from an unexpected angle. It was small compared to the Drekker fleet, barely a speck of metal against the swarm. A human transport ship was passing through the sector when they picked up our distress signal. They were not military. They were carrying supplies to a mining colony on the other side of the system. But when they heard what was happening, they changed course. The human ship plunged into the swarm, dodging attacks that should have destroyed it instantly. It twisted and spun through the chaos, somehow finding gaps in the Drekker formation. They crashed through the blockade and landed inside the station, Nara said. 47 human soldiers came off that ship, volunteers. They were not ordered to fight. They chose to. She changed the display again. Now Yeri was looking at security footage from inside the station. She saw humans in combat gear taking positions at doorways and corridors. She saw them building barricades from broken furniture and scrap metal. She saw them checking their weapons and talking to each other with grim expressions. They looked so small, so fragile. Against the Drekker, they should have been nothing more than food. The Drekker broke through the outer defenses on the second day, Nara said. From that moment on, it was constant battle. The humans fought in shifts. 4 hours of sleep, then back to the line. They did not have enough weapons. They did not have enough ammunition. They were bleeding from wounds that would have put any Velen in a medical tank. The footage showed the humans fighting. Yuri watched a soldier take a claw strike to the chest that should have killed him instantly. He staggered but did not fall. He raised his weapon and kept firing. Another soldier dragged a wounded comrade to safety while shooting with one hand. A third soldier threw himself on top of a Drekker creature that had breached their line, holding it down while others finished it off. They were dying. One by one, they were being torn apart. But they did not run. They did not hide. They stood in front of the civilian shelters and refused to move. 21 days, Nara said quietly. 47 humans held the line for 21 days. They fought without rest, without hope, without any reason to believe they would survive. By the time my fleet arrived, only 3 of them were still alive. The hologram froze on a final image. A young human soldier, barely conscious, covered in blood that was both his own and his enemy's. He was sitting against a wall, his weapon still in his hands, guarding a door that led to the civilian shelters. Behind that door, 20,000 Velens had survived because of him. Yuri felt her heart beating faster. She looked at the soldier's face and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She recognized him, the same dark hair, though without the silver streaks of age. The same calm eyes, though filled with pain in this frozen moment. The same quiet expression of someone who had seen too much and kept going anyway. It was Kang Taiho. You laughed at this man, Nara said, and now her voice was sharp. You mocked him in front of the entire alliance. You tried to humiliate him as if he were nothing. Yari opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. My brother is alive because of him, Nara continued. 20,000 of our people are alive because 47 humans decided that strangers were worth dying for. They did not know us. They did not owe us anything. They simply heard that people were in trouble and chose to help. She stepped closer to her daughter. 44 of them died on that station. 44 soldiers who gave everything for a species that laughed at them. And you stood in my hall tonight and treated their survivor like a joke. Yeri felt tears forming in her eyes. She tried to blink them away, but they fell anyway, running down her silver cheeks. I did not know, she whispered. That is exactly the problem, Nara said. You did not know, and you did not bother to find out. You saw a species that looked weak and decided they were worth nothing. You judged them by their bodies instead of their spirits. She turned back to the hologram, to the frozen image of young Taiho bleeding against that wall. Humans are not strong the way we are strong. Their bodies break. Their bones shatter. They feel pain more intensely than almost any species in the Alliance. And they fight anyway. They endure anyway. They sacrifice themselves for strangers anyway. That is not weakness, daughter. That is something we do not have a word for. Yeri stared at the image. She thought about the banquet, about Taiho's hand trembling in hers, about the pain in his eyes as he refused to yield. He had been hurting. He had been suffering. But he had not given up, because giving up was not something he knew how to do. What should I do? Yeri asked, her voice small. Nara looked at her for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentler but still firm. Tomorrow, at the opening assembly, you will correct your mistake. The entire alliance will be watching. And you will show them that the Velen people understand true strength when we see it. She touched the controls, and the hologram disappeared, plunging the room into darkness. Now go. You have a long night ahead of you. Yeri walked toward the door on unsteady legs. Before she reached it, her mother's voice stopped her one last time. One more thing, daughter. When you bow tomorrow, I want you to understand why you are bowing. Not because I ordered it, but because he deserves it. The door opened, and Yeri stepped out into the corridor. Behind her, she heard her mother say something very quietly, almost too soft to hear. And because I should have bowed years ago. Yeri did not sleep that night. She returned to her chambers and sent her attendants away, telling them she wished to be alone. Then she sat in the darkness, thinking about everything she had seen. After an hour, she could not stand it anymore. She needed to understand. She went to the palace archives, a vast underground library that held records from every major event in Velen history. The hall was empty at this hour, lit only by the soft glow of data terminals floating in the air. Yeri sat down at one of them and began searching. The Siege of Chiron Station. 47 human volunteers. 21 days. The records were extensive. Someone had saved everything. Security footage, communication logs, medical reports, final messages. Yeri began watching and reading, and she did not stop. She saw humans doing things that should have been impossible. One soldier had been shot through the leg on the third day. Any Velen would have been taken to medical care immediately. But the human had wrapped the wound with cloth, injected himself with something from a small kit, and returned to his post within an hour. He had continued fighting on that leg for another 18 days. Another soldier had gone, without sleep for 72 hours straight during a particularly heavy assault. When asked how he was still standing, he had simply said, "I will sleep when they are safe." He had collapsed immediately after the rescue fleet arrived. Doctors said he should have died from exhaustion alone. A female soldier had used her own body to shield a group of Velen children when a Drekker creature broke through the barricade. She had been badly injured, but had managed to kill the creature with a knife while lying on the ground. When the children asked her if she was okay, she had smiled and said, "Just a scratch." She had died from her wounds 3 days later. She was 24 years old. Yeri watched footage of humans crying over fallen comrades, then wiping their tears and returning to battle. She watched them share their last food with Velen civilians who were too afraid to eat. She watched them tell jokes to scared children. Even as the sounds of fighting echoed through the station, they were afraid. She could see it in their eyes, in their shaking hands, in the way they flinched at every explosion. They were terrified, but they did not run. I found a file labeled Human Biology Report and opened it. It was written by a Velen scientist who had studied humanity for decades. She began reading. Humans, the report explained, had evolved as persistence hunters on their home planet. They could not run as fast as their prey, but they could run longer. They would chase animals for hours, sometimes days, never stopping until their target collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies were designed for endurance, not power. This meant that humans could push through pain and fatigue that would shut down any other species. Their minds could override their bodies' warning signals and keep going long past the point of safety. It was a survival mechanism that had kept them alive in a dangerous world, but it came with a cost. Humans felt everything more intensely. Pain, fear, exhaustion, grief. Their nervous systems were highly sensitive, designed to provide constant feedback about their environment, They were not numb to suffering. They simply learned to suffer and continue anyway. The report contained a quote from a human philosopher. Yeri read it several times. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is being afraid and doing what must be done anyway. She sat back in her chair and thought about Kang Taiho. She thought about his hand trembling in hers at the banquet, about the sweat on his forehead and the veins straining in his neck. He had been in pain. Real, intense pain. And he had looked her in the eyes and refused to yield. That was not stubbornness. That was something else entirely. A sound made her look up. Someone else had entered the archive room. It was a human male in a military uniform, older than Taiho, but with the same quiet posture. He stopped when he saw her. "Forgive me," he said. "I did not mean to intrude. I was looking for historical records." Yeri recognized him from the delegation. He was the other soldier, the one who walked beside Taiho sometimes. Captain Dian, if she remembered correctly. "You are not intruding," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Tired. Thoughtful. "I was just learning." Do-hyun looked at the terminal she had been using. He could see the file she had been reading. Something in his expression softened. "You are learning about Chiron Station," he said. It was not a question. Yeri nodded. "I did not know about any of it. I thought—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Do-hyun walked closer and sat down in a chair across from her. He moved slowly, like a man who had learned patience through hard experience. "Most people do not know," he said. "We did not ask for recognition. We were just doing our job." 44 of you died," Yeri said. "How can you call it just a job?" Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "Taiho does not talk about Chiron Station. He has not spoken of it in 12 years. But I served with him before and after that mission. I know what it cost him." He leaned forward slightly. "He carries the names of every soldier who died there. 44 names tattooed on his back. One for each person he could not save. Every morning when he wakes and every night before he sleeps, he sees those names in the mirror." Yeri felt a tightness in her chest. Why? Why would he do that to himself? Because he believes their sacrifice should not be forgotten. Because he thinks he should have done more, even though he was barely alive himself at the end. Because humans carry their ghosts with them, and Taiho carries 44. Do-hyun looked at the terminal, at the frozen image of young Taiho bleeding against the wall. He came back to service 3 months after the rescue. The doctors told him to rest for at least a year. His body was broken in more ways than I can count. But he refused to stop. He said protecting others was the only way he knew how to honor their memory. Yeri thought about everything she had said and done. She thought about calling him weak. She thought about laughing at him with her attendants. Shame filled her like cold water. "I was cruel to him," she said quietly. "I was cruel and stupid and wrong." "Yes," Do-hyun agreed. "You were." There was no anger in his voice. Just a simple truth. "But you are learning now," he continued. "That matters. Taiho would not want you to suffer for your mistake. He would want you to understand and grow." "How can you know that?" Do-hyun smiled slightly. "Because that is who he is. He does not hold grudges. He does not seek revenge. He just wants to help people, even people who hurt him." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data chip. He placed it on the table between them. "This contains the names and service records of every soldier who died at Chiron Station. Their faces, their stories, their final messages home. If you truly want to understand, start there." Yeri picked up the chip carefully, as if it might break in her hands. "Tomorrow, your mother will ask you to bow before Taiho in front of the entire alliance," Do-hyun said. "You can do it because you are ordered to, and it will mean nothing. Or you can do it because you understand what he represents, and it will mean everything. He stood up and walked toward the door. Before he left, he turned back one last time. Humans do not think of ourselves as strong. We know we are fragile. We know we can break. That is exactly why we fight so hard. Because we understand how precious life is, and we refuse to let it be taken without a fight. Then he was gone. And Yeri was alone with 44 names she did. Not yet, no. She inserted the chip into the terminal and began to read. There was a young woman who had joined the military to pay for her brother's education. She had sent a final message home saying she was proud to die for something meaningful. There was a man who had recently become a father. He had never met his daughter. His last words were asking someone to tell her that he loved her. There was a soldier who had been afraid of the dark his whole life. He had died fighting in a corridor with no lights, holding the line until his ammunition ran out. 40-4 stories. 44 lives. 44 people who had decided that strangers on a distant station were worth dying for. By the time the sun began to rise over Velar Prime, Yeri had read them all. Her eyes were red from tears she had not tried to stop. Her heart ached with a weight she had never felt before. She understood now. She understood everything, and she knew exactly what she had to do. The Grand Assembly Hall was the heart of the Alliance Summit. It was built to hold representatives from every spacefaring species in the known galaxy, and today it was completely full. Thousands of delegates sat in rising tiers around a central stage. Their faces turned toward the podium where speeches would be given and treaties would be signed. The crystals on the walls had been set to pure white, a symbol of unity and peace. Light streamed down from massive windows in the ceiling, making the entire hall glow like the inside of a star. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Yuri stood near the back of the Valen delegation, dressed in formal robes that felt heavier than usual. She had not slept. She had not eaten. She had spent the entire night reading about 44 humans who had given their lives for her people. And now she could not stop seeing their faces. She looked across the hall to where the human delegation sat. They were in their usual small section, surrounded by larger and more powerful species. Kang Taiho stood behind the ambassador's chair, just as he had at the banquet. His hands still showed faint bruises from their grip contest, but his posture was perfect. His expression was calm. He did not know what was about to happen. None of the humans did. High Commander Nara took the central stage, and the hall fell silent. She was the most powerful military leader in the Alliance, and when she spoke, everyone listened. "Welcome, friends and allies," Nara began. Her voice carried across the vast space without amplification. "We gathered today to renew our bonds of peace and cooperation. The Alliance has stood for 300 years because we learned that together we are stronger than apart." She paused, looking across the assembled delegates. "But before we begin the formal proceedings, there is a matter of honor that must be addressed. A debt that has gone unpaid for far too long." Whispers spread through the hall. This was not part of the planned program. Nara raised her hand, and a massive hologram appeared above the stage. It showed Chiron Station, surrounded by the Drekker swarm. Gasps came from delegates who recognized the image. 12 years ago, our colony at Chiron Station was under siege. 20,000 of our people faced certain death. Our fleet was destroyed, and rescue was weeks away. We had lost all hope. The hologram shifted to show the human transport ship crashing through the blockade. Then 47 humans arrived. They were not soldiers on a mission. They were volunteers who heard our distress signal and chose to help. They knew they would probably die. They came anyway. Now the footage showed the humans fighting inside the station. Delegates leaned forward in their seats, watching with wide eyes. Many of them had never seen this before. For 21 days, these humans held the line against the Drekker. They fought without rest, without reinforcement, without hope of survival. They bled for strangers. They died for strangers. And when my fleet finally arrived, only 3 of them remained alive. Nara's voice grew heavy with emotion. 44 humans gave their lives so that 20,000 Velans could live. My own brother was among those saved. Every day, I think about what those soldiers did. And every day, I am ashamed that I never properly thanked them. She turned and looked directly at the human delegation. One of those survivors is here today. He has served quietly and faithfully for 12 years, never asking for recognition, never seeking glory. He carries the weight of his fallen comrades in silence, because that is who he is. The hall was completely still. Not a single person moved or spoke. "Sergeant Kang Taiho," Nara said. "Please come forward." Taiho looked surprised. For a moment, he did not move. Then the ambassador touched his arm and nodded gently. He walked down from his section and approached the central stage, his boots echoing in the silence. When he reached the podium, he stopped and stood at attention. His face was unreadable, but Yeri could see confusion in his eyes. He had no idea what was happening. Nara descended from the podium and walked toward him. She was carrying her ceremonial sword, the blade that had been passed down through her family for generations. It was the most precious object she owned. She stopped in front of Taiho and slowly removed the sword from its sheath. The blade caught the light and gleamed like silver fire. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, High Commander Nara laid the sword at Taiho's feet. Gasps filled the hall. Every Velan in the room knew what this meant. It was the highest honor a warrior could receive, a symbol of total respect and gratitude. No off-worlder had ever been given this honor in the entire history of their species. "This blade has been carried by my ancestors for 20 generations," Nara said. "They earned it through courage, sacrifice, and honor. Today I give it to you because you have shown all 3 in measure that humbles us all." Taiho stared at the sword, then at Nara. He seemed unable to speak. Nara turned to face the assembly. "We measure strength in claws and armor and power. We look at humans and see fragile bodies that break and bleed. We think ourselves superior because we can lift heavier weights and survive greater injuries." Her voice rose, filling every corner of the massive hall. But true strength is not in the body. True strength is in the spirit that refuses to break even when the body fails. True strength is standing when you have every reason to fall, fighting when you have every reason to flee, and dying for strangers because you believe their lives matter. She pointed at Taiho. "This man taught my people what it truly means to be warriors. And today, we will show him the respect he deserves." Nara turned and looked toward the back of the Velan delegation. Her eyes found Yeri. "Daughter, come forward." Yeri's heart pounded in her chest. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she felt terrified. Thousands of eyes were watching her. The entire galaxy would hear about what happened next. She walked forward on unsteady legs, passing through the crowd of delegates until she reached the central stage. She stood before Taiho, close enough to see the old scars on his hands, close enough to see the quiet confusion in his eyes. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was so complete that Yeri could hear her own blood rushing in her ears. Then Nara's voice came, firm and commanding. Bow before him. Yeri looked at Taiho. She thought about everything she had learned. She thought about 44 soldiers who had died for people they had never met. She thought about a young sergeant who had held a door against monsters, bleeding and broken but refusing to give up. She thought about how she had laughed at him, how she had called him weak, how she had tried to humiliate him for the entertainment of others. Slowly, Yuri lowered herself to one knee, then both knees. She placed her hands on the floor in front of her and bowed her head until her forehead touched the cold stone. The hall erupted in whispers. Valens never bowed like this to anyone. It was the position of total submission, reserved for moments of deepest shame or highest reverence. For the daughter of the High Commander to bow before an off-worlder was unprecedented. But Yeri did not care about tradition anymore. She cared about truth. "I was wrong," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I judged you by your body instead of your spirit. I laughed at your people while knowing nothing about their courage. I am ashamed of myself, and I ask for your forgiveness." The hall fell silent again. Taeho looked down at her for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He knelt down himself and gently touched her shoulder. "Please stand," he said quietly. "There is nothing to forgive." Yeri looked up at him. His eyes were kind, not angry. There was no trace of satisfaction or revenge in his expression. Just understanding. "I do not need your apology," Taeho continued. "I only did what any human would do. We are not heroes. We are just people who cannot stand by when others are suffering." He offered her his hand. Yeri took it and allowed him to help her rise. For a moment, they stood facing each other, human and Velen, in front of the entire galaxy. Then Yeri did something that felt more natural than anything she had ever done before. She smiled. "Then perhaps," she said, "we should learn more from each other." Taeho returned the smile, just slightly. "I would like that." The hall was quiet for another heartbeat. Then applause began. It started from the human delegation, just a few people clapping. But it spread quickly, jumping from section to section, species to species. The Kelthari stamped their feet. The Mirith sent waves of approval through the air. The Aran activated lights that sparkled like stars. Within moments, the entire assembly was on its feet, applauding and cheering. High Commander Nara watched with quiet satisfaction. She had hoped this moment would come, but she had not known if her daughter would truly understand. Now she saw that Yeri had not just followed orders. She had found her own path to the same truth. The applause continued for several minutes. When it finally died down, delegates began approaching the human section, introducing themselves and asking questions. The humans, who had been isolated in their small corner, were suddenly the center of attention. Yeri stepped back and watched it happen. She saw Taeho being surrounded by curious aliens who wanted to hear his story. She saw Captain Do-hyun answering questions about human biology and history. She saw the ambassador smiling with genuine surprise. Something had changed today. Not just for her, but for the entire alliance. She felt a presence beside her and turned to find her mother standing there. "You did well," Nara said. "I meant every word.